Daily Tech News Show is made possible by its listeners. Thanks to all of you, including Wabbit Magic. Rest in peace, Alan. On this episode of DTNS, Google explains why its search was telling you to glue cheese to a pizza. Meta rolls out Threads Deck, its TweetDeck clone. And Chris Mancini joins us to talk about how AI-generated books are affecting him as an independent publisher. This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, May 31st, 2024 in Los Angeles. I'm Tom Merritt.
And from Studio Animal House, I'm Sarah Lane.
I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
And joining us, writer and podcaster Chris Mancini. Welcome back.
Yay, thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, thanks for coming back. It is good to talk to you. We got some AI topics to kick around. We got some other stuff to kick around, but let's start by kicking around the quick hits.
Reuters sources say TikTok's executives talked in an all-hands meeting about a project to separate its algorithm in the U.S. from the rest of the world. TikTok posted on X that the story is misleading and factually inaccurate and told The Verge that the report that the code is being split is 100% false. TikTok has until January 19th to either get the law overturned in court or sell off its U.S. version of TikTok, or Facebook face a ban on distribution of TikTok in the U.S. altogether.
In a document created on October 19th, 2020, the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, recommended several ways to protect phones from security threats. One of them is to turn off the phone at least once a week in order to prevent zero-click exploits and spear phishing attacks. PC World wrote an article about the practice on May 17th, just earlier, a couple weeks ago, and updated it last Thursday. Then Forbes picked up the story and ran it Thursday. And now it seems like every local news outlet in the United States is running it as well. It's not a new document, but it's newly discovered by many people. But it's not bad advice either. Some zero-click exploits can happen by text message and don't require any interaction from you, but they can stay resident on the phone until you reboot. But once you reboot, they're gone.
Spotify will now refund owners for Car Thing. That was the $90 hardware device that allowed users to stream Spotify in their cars, set to be bricked on December 9th. Spotify started emailing Car Thing's owners that their devices would soon stop working via email on May 24th. At the time, didn't guarantee refunds, and people were like, what? Are you kidding? Ars Technica confirmed Thursday that Spotify has indeed started a refund process.
Two studies are getting a lot of attention today, and they were both published in the journal Science. One is from scientists at Ben-Gurion University and Northwestern University. They studied more than 664,000 voters and their activity on Twitter during the 2020 election. They found that a small percentage of users accounted for a large majority of the false information being spread about the election. While they could tell the accounts were not probably automated, it is possible they were paid by organizations, something called sock puppets, but it may not matter because the other study published in the journal Science from MIT found that during COVID, mainstream stories about negative effects of vaccines had more influence on people than outright false information. So here's an example. Mainstream story from the Chicago Tribune had the headline, "A healthy doctor died 2 weeks after getting a COVID vaccine. CDC is investigating and why." Nothing factually inaccurate, but it's possible that people would be misled into believing that there is more danger than the story says. It's possible that misinformation spread was not all that effective, and the swaying of public opinion might still remain the province of mainstream media.
The Wall Street Journal's Alina Disick has an anecdotal story about restaurants around the U.S. moving away from QR codes as menus. The practice was very common after lockdowns as a way to prevent circulation of items people touched. However, many restaurants are back to printed menus. Some are keeping the QR codes for additional information. For example, Flour and Water in San Francisco has a QR code on the printed menu that offers diners tasting notes for the wine list. Just for reference, Flour and Water is like an expensive kind of place that you would have pizza at. And one use of QR codes seems to remain popular. That's being able to pay your bill without having to call a waiter or head to the counter.
I'm all for QR codes not being the menu, but I do like paying. I do like paying by QR code. Chris, do you do that? Do you like the QR code thing?
I do. It's actually easier and quicker to do the QR code when it works.
Yeah, when it works. And it's working more often, but still not all the time.
Yes.
All right. VP and head of Google Search Liz Reid wrote a blog post describing how Google is addressing the odd results in AI overviews. AI overviews is the summary response to your search query that appears at the top above the usual list of links. You know, like use non-toxic glue to add, make sure your cheese sticks to the pizza. First off, she pointed out that the AI overviews are not as inaccurate as you might think based on the headlines. The percentage of odd and inaccurate answers is very low, in the less than 1% category, but there are billions of people using Google, so there's hundreds of examples. Some screenshots were faked, so you may have seen some AI overviews that weren't actually things that happened in Google. Also, she wrote that it is not hallucinating. Hallucinating is the term you use when ChatGPT just makes something up and you know it's not true. AI Overviews does use a large language model, but it is combined with actual high-ranked search results. So it has links to everything it says.
Okay, so knowing all of this, why does this still fail sometimes?
So we actually went through an article that supposed why it would be failing on Daily Tech News Show previously, and what Reid wrote was actually pretty close to this. Misinterpreting queries. My example the last time we talked about this was meaning Sarah Lane, the excellent podcaster, but then having AI overviews tell you about Sarah Lane, the ballerina, right? It just can't always tell the difference between things that sound or are spelled the same. Misinterpreting a nuance of language. So satire is a big tripping point. It doesn't understand when you're joking. And not having a lot of great information to choose from. If there aren't great sources for it in the high-ranked web pages, it's just going to pick what's available, and maybe that isn't very good. A combo example of that was the famous "How many rocks should I eat?" and AI overviews telling you doctors recommend you eat one a day, because it didn't have a lot of high-ranking answers to a question that nobody really asks, and the one it did have was from The Onion. And it didn't know that The Onion was satire, so it cited it as real.
Okay, so what
AI can't learn that The Onion is satire?
AI is really bad at telling satire.
Should know that, but in this case, obviously, it didn't know that.
It's one of our advantages, Chris, is that we still can tell satire.
That'll help us beat the robots.
Yeah. Okay, but assuming that, we're going to figure out how AI is better going forward, how do we fix what's broken?
Okay, here's what they say they're doing to fix it. They are limiting the use of user-generated content in the answers. So a lot of the stuff, yes, there's the Onion article that's famous, but there were also Reddit posts where people were giving joking answers, and again, it couldn't tell it was joking. So they're cutting down on the user-generated content that it relies on. They are adding restrictions on queries that Google has identified as not returning helpful answers. That's just some manual tuning that they have to do. And they are expanding the restrictions on summarizing health info. You may not have realized they don't summarize hard news at all. They were restricted on what health info they would summarize, and they're going to increase those restrictions. So there's less of a chance of getting bad health info.
Okay, so do we think...
Because the internet is full of great health info, too. I mean, anytime you have a symptom, you type it in like, oh, I'm dying.
Yeah,
okay.
I get a lot of it from The Onion. So
yeah.
Yeah, well, best of luck there, Tom.
Two rocks a day keeps the satire away.
Right. But even for anybody who's sort of like, okay, I can filter out some of these like silly answers, do we think that this new way that AI is going to help humans is going to work?
No. The answer is no. Reid does not expect it to be perfect. Actually, it will reduce the number of fake answers. There weren't that many to begin. She's right. But Reid said herself, at the scale of the web, with billions of queries coming in every day, there are bound to be some oddities and errors.
All right, Chris, knowing what we've told you, and obviously, you may have experienced AI in one sense or another, but, where do you fall on this?
Probably the same place as Tom. It's not ready for prime time. I mean, I started seeing that too up on my Google searches, and I was just trying to find a video game answer of how to save in a certain game, and it gave me absolutely incorrect information. And the thing that's frustrating is, why can't I just get a slider or a button, shut off AI prompt or whatever, and then I can just go back to regular searches? We're being forced fed AI in every aspect, and I think that can be toned down a bit.
Yeah, there are times when I have used the AI overviews because I opted into the beta a long time ago, and it hasn't always been bad. Sometimes it's helpful. I would like to choose when I want to hear from it and when I don't. They did add the web filter now alongside images and news and shopping, so you can click into that. That's something. But yeah, I like the idea of a slider or something that you can toggle on and off. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so if I want it or I don't want it. Or maybe some days I want it, some days I don't.
Or can it guess when I want it?
Yes.
Well, social networks might be a place where we're all talking about this AI
absolutely.
thing and how it works for us. So rejoice if you're a web thread user, as I am. I love a good web situation, and Threads is one of them. Meta is rolling out its new Tweetdeck-like, not exactly the same, but Tweetdeck-like column view to all users on Threads after announcing the feature in testing earlier this month. Some Threads users have nicknamed that look Threads Deck, which lets you pin as much as 100 different feeds to the Threads homepage. I've done 5, and it's gotten very crowded, so I don't know how you would do 100, but okay. Each column can be set to auto-update, so you can follow new posts as they come in. This might be very advantageous if you're following a specific news story, for example. The new look won't eliminate the For You feed, and some Threads users have never really liked that For You feed. That's the feed that it's not following, it's what we think you might like. You can turn it off, but it always comes back every time you log in again. But you can more easily hide it this way by putting your following feed and any other feeds that you're following, whether it be a news topic, a certain person. Maybe I want to just have Ace Detect be, one of my columns. That is now in my control. Many TweetDeck users found practical for finding real-time information, exactly what Threads is going for. But Tom, in our pre-show, you were like, oh, this isn't really Threads.
Yeah, I was a big TweetDeck user. And I used it for following reactions to my posts. I used it for following friends and family. And the Threads thing doesn't really do those things yet. Right. I never really used TweetDeck the way a lot of people did, which was following news stories. So being able to do a search and then follow that isn't exactly something I'm looking for. I did pin following and For You next to each other. I think being against the algorithmic feed is just one of those things that's very fashionable to do these days. But a lot of times the For You feed will show you things you would have missed otherwise. So I find value in both For You and following. So that's what I've done. I've pinned those two next to each other. Chris, I don't know how much you use Threads or if this is appealing to you.
Well, all I know is you can't fight the algorithm, Tom. You can try, but the algorithm's always going to catch up with you. But I don't really use it as much. But what I find fascinating about when stories like this come out, it's always one social media company trying to copy the functionality of another social media company until we're ultimately going to have one that tries to do everything. But this is another example of that. This works over here. Let's move it over here and call it something else.
Although you can't get TweetDeck without paying now. So a lot of people moved from X to Threads, and kind of miss the old free TweetDeck that we had. So I get the excitement around it, and I certainly get why Instagram would want to mimic it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Honestly, I was not a TweetDeck user. I mean, I used it because I tested it here and there, but I wasn't really a user of TweetDeck. However, what I think that Threads is trying to replicate, and as you mentioned, Tom, it's not totally the same, but to be able to say like, all right, give me the just the For You page. Then if I want to filter by like, what's the news about orcas in the world? Like, okay, got that. That's another column. Like this is anything that gives you an ability to customize your experience is a good thing. And Threads sort of historically was like, we don't want to give that to you yet. We're going to be like very bare bones, for a while where people were like, okay, well.
Well, yeah, because they were just getting started there. Yeah, that's why I don't want to hate on the Threads deck, limited functionality too much, because I assume they will add more features as they go along, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to spoil you up front either.
They're just a small company, Chris. Give them a chance.
Yeah, you got to take time. They've got one beta tester in a basement. That's all they have.
That's all they got. And the 3 billion users on Facebook, but they don't all use Threads yet. So,
but I thought that this would be a good opportunity to go around the horn about what we do like as far as filtered news. When you fire up your social network of choice, what do you want to, see? And then what do you want to drill down into? Chris?
That's an interesting question. I deliberately make sure I avoid news on social media because it's it's a trap. Because if you get one polarizing article, then there's like 1,000 comments after it or people fighting back and forth. And it's one of the things I actually avoid. Like when I want news, I'll go to a specific news site. But and if somebody is super political on social media, I like mute or turn them off because it's, you could go down a bad rabbit hole very quickly with news on social media for sure.
Yeah, I'm the same. I actively do not consume news on X or Threads or Mastodon in my feed. I go to my feed to see what people are talking about. And I will occasionally search. I will search to be like, okay, I want to know if people are, have found anything about this particular story. But I'm like Chris. I go directly to particular news sources that I curate very closely and feel like I can rely on, just to avoid that thing that we were talking about in the quick hits, where you're just seeing a bunch of stuff that's not reliable.
Right.
How about you, Sarah? What do you do?
And then I was going to say also, we do search to see, like, if you're on social media, wait, is that celebrity really dead? Then that's our
yes, right. Did they post recently?
Yeah.
Do you use it for news though?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do. At the same time, just because of the nature of, I think, how we all probably operate news-wise. And we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show with Rob Dunwood and Justin Robert Young. I just simply can't deal with it first thing in the morning. I have to, feed myself, walk my dog, do tech news, and keep it focused. But afterwards, I like what Threads is doing as far as giving me options to consume news in a different way, rather than like a one-trick pony, feed. Okay, I can make this a little bit more customized. I like that.
Well, it's not news, but you might also like our top 5 series, Tom's Top 5. Each episode is just 60 seconds. We count down 5 things, usually in the world of technology or around it. I've been doing a lot of user-suggested top 5s lately, so go watch them all. 60 seconds a pop. You can watch a bunch of them. They are at Daily Tech News Show on TikTok, DTNS Pix, PIX on Instagram, and youtube.com/Daily Tech News Show. Fast Company has a profile story up on a startup called Naria, founded by some Amazon folks, former Amazon folks. Naria lets parents and kids create custom children's storybooks. So you describe the character, the scenes, and a model will fill out the plot for you. It will also help with illustrations, let you upload your own photos. You can create characters, based on your kids, for your kids to watch or read about. Finished stories can even be printed out as a physical book. And Naria is working with creators to say, well, if people like the characters from your stories, we'll sort of do a revenue share with you to use those characters in kind of a creator-funded model for this. Chris, as an author and independent publisher, these kinds of tools are becoming more frequent. More people are able to just go into ChatGPT and say, tell me a story. How do you feel about this?
The way most artists feel, horrified. Because what it does is AI it's pulling and creating all of these images and these stories. They're pulling from actual work that humans have created. AI is basically a compiling tool of search engine searches. So when you put all these things together and they're talking about revenue sharing, well, what about revenue sharing with the people whose work all of your AI is based on? At first I was like, oh, maybe they're going to, find out where the AI is getting the source material and then actually see if those creators want a piece. But no, it's the opposite. The whatever the AI spits out, then maybe we'll revenue share. And Naria, that's pretty close to Narnia, isn't it? For children's stories books.
I don't think C.S. Lewis will mind, but maybe his estate will.
All right.
Yeah.
It's
So it sounds like you're very much in the camp of like, this is just exploitative and I don't like it.
Yeah, pretty much. And in fact, I was just at a WGA meeting and for a committee, and we were talking about like a presentation for AI, and some writers are using them as tools to generate ideas, and a lot of the ideas generated by AI are terrible, and they're like the hackiest premises you could type. Like you type in what you want, and then it gives you the weirdest, hackiest premise you could come up with, which I guess is saving some of the hackier writers' time. I'm not sure, but the main complaint and why the writers and artists went on and actors went on strike, and also why comic book artists, everybody's really not happy with this, is mainly because it's just pulling from work already created by people. And if there's a way to label things, if there's a way to compensate the creators that these new works are being based on, maybe there's a middle ground somewhere, but we're not there yet. There's a lot of ground that still needs to be covered.
And it's a difficult question because the way these algorithms work, they don't copy or store the work. They use the work to figure out what are the relationships between words, and then they have a relational database based on that learning. So, it's not as clear as a copying situation, right? It's very, very difficult to take existing law and apply it. It's one of the reasons I have been saying, like, we need new rules around how all of this works.
And it's, what you just said is also very true for, images that artists draw and pages and illustrations and all of those things.
Yeah.
It's not just copying something from like The Hobbit or anything like that. But, if you put, show me a demon with a wizard in on a rock bridge, I'm like, it's probably going to look close to Gandalf and the Balrog. But, you have all of these, rules in place, like, AI can't copyright. You can't copyright work made by AI. It still has to be copyrighted by a person. But like you said, we need new rules. Well, what about hybrid things that are created? And what about databases? And what about a book that gets published that was made solely through AI? Like, all of these things need to be still addressed. And like I said, the writers and artists, or the writers and actors, when they went on strike, they addressed some of it, but there's still ground to cover, like I said.
Do you find any of these generative models useful in any of the work you're doing?
You know what? It's not yet, but I'm sure I will at some point, because like when we make things called pitch decks for movies and TV shows, these are like internal documents that can kind of create a mood, and they were often generated internally for pitch purposes. It's going to streamline stuff like that very quickly. So there are certain tools that can definitely be really useful. Now, as far as like the actual writing, like brainstorming and stuff, I mean, there's kind of tools already, but ultimately at the end of the day, if you're an artist, you still have to do the work yourself.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal, Joanna Stern and a couple of the other reporters there did a test of all the current generative models. And one of the things they found it was worst at was creative writing. They're like, it's really good at financial stuff. It's pretty great at coding. It's awful at creative writing. It's better at business writing, but it's not even that much better.
I was going to say, like, I think the first step into that pool is grant writing or something like that, where it's any kind of like business proposals. It's probably it can grab and create a little bit easier.
I found it the new model, the ChatGPT model, it's 4.0, not 4.0, which is always confusing. But it's actually gotten decent at copy editing. So like finding typos and things like that, which there've been some other programs that have kind of fine-tuned models to be really good at that anyway. So you can, your mileage may vary whether Grammarly is just a better option anyway.
Yeah, well, that stuff can be super helpful if like it can really dial in, and if you have a manuscript or something and you want to just put it through, and then because as we write as writers, you don't always see those errors, even though somebody reading it can.
Oh yeah.
And then it comes back completely red. I'm like, wait, I missed half the letters. What happened?
I was putting in my stuff in Microsoft Copilot though, and then I would catch it changing things, like rewriting sentences. I'm like, no, I just want you to catch a typo, and I don't need a full edit. Yeah.
Yeah, put the apostrophe in can't. That's it.
Mm-hmm. That's all I want. Don't change it to won't.
Yeah.
All right. Let's check out the mailbag.
Let's do it. Fabio responded to Roger's latest 2 cents column on Patreon about the cinema experience not bringing in expected money these days. Fabio says, this is a worldwide situation. I'm Chilean, and there are too many entertainment options that going to the cinema is more trouble than pleasure. At home, we have a good 65-inch 4K TV. Prices are lower every day. A plethora of services: Netflix, Prime Video, Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, Crunchyroll, etc. at affordable prices. That's more than anyone can even watch. I'm canceling Disney Plus this month, and Max too for that reason, says Fabio. Game Pass for games, and so on. Movies, not for me and the family anymore.
Chris, are you going out to the movies? I mean, for years, I was a guest on your movie podcast. I'm curious if you're still watching the movies in the theaters.
You know what? I am, but every time I go, it's empty.
Oh, no, really?
So,
yeah.
Yeah, but I am still enjoying the going to the theater. I don't go as much as I used to, well, obviously, because I don't have a movie podcast anymore. I don't have to go every week anymore. But it's after the pandemic, as the recovery of the movie theaters was very, very slow. But, despite whatever the CEO of AMC says, it's not where it used to be, and it may never get there again. But it's still an enjoyable experience. And it's one of those things where, the movie theaters have to kind of come up with different ways to make it more compelling and exciting. Like one of the things is like we talked about before, the Beyonce and the touring, things like
Taylor
that,
Swift
where people go in Taylor Swift. And, but one of the things too is like you make the movie experience more compelling. Like when we went to see Dune 2, we waited until we could grab an IMAX screen. And we had to wait I think 2 months because it kept selling out over and over again, but it was spectacular. And it's a movie that was shot for a massive screen and great sound. And, I think what you're going to see more is it has to be more of an experience to get you to leave your home. Like Fabio is right. That's not I can't believe it's not butter Fabio. That's a different Fabio, right?
It is.
We don't know.
I think.
Yes.
I don't know for sure, but yes, I think so.
So I think it's one of those things where you make it interesting and you make it different and you make it like more of an event that you can experience at home, like a giant IMAX screen, like a concert where you're around a bunch of screaming fans like yourself, and you have it more of a community event. Like horror movies were always the big community thing. Like you go and you get scared.
Of course,
with
yeah,
all
you're
your friends and the rest
feeding
of the
off
audience.
everyone else's
Yeah.
reactions.
So I think it's, movie theaters have to still figure that out a little bit more, like what's making it more interesting to come here than to stay home.
Well, Chris Mancini, we will continue this conversation with you in GDI. But
Excellent.
For now, let folks know where they can keep up with everything that you do.
Absolutely. That is whitecatentertainment.com. You can get podcasts, graphic novels, and some books. And the one podcast that we're growing and promoting right now is The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood. It's a storytelling comedy podcast that helps you kind of lower anxiety and helps you go to sleep. I've been told I make people go to sleep with my voice, so I leaned into it. And now I'm doing it on purpose. So,
I love that. Yeah.
But
Awesome.
isn't that weird that, like, I think, especially in this country, people might need something that maybe lower anxiety a little
Can't
bit.
imagine
So
why, but yeah.
So I wanted to create something
Never
that
had
would help.
anxiety myself.
So I wanted to create something that was like that did all the work for you. There's no breathing exercises. It just tells funny, silly stories where you can relax your music and sound design and just kind of lower the temperature or go to sleep.
Indeed. Well, good. Well, we're going to keep talking to Chris, like Sarah said, and it's Friday, so A Good Day Internet is our place to do some fun Friday stuff, and Roger has put together another round of the great GDI debates. We're going to debate ebooks versus paper books, the best all-female 80s band, and no expense spared taste experience versus super cheap eats. What is your priority? Stick around for that.
Just a reminder, though, you can catch our show live. DTNS is live Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC. You can find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. We hope you all have a real nice weekend. We're back on Monday discussing if YouTube is an entirely new category of entertainment, with Shannon Morse joining us. Talk to you then.
This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show were created by the following people: host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt, host, producer, and writer Sarah Lane, executive producer and booker Roger Chang, producer, writer, and co-host Rob Dunwood, video producer Joe Kuntz, producer at large Anthony Lemos, Spanish language host, writer, and producer Dan Campos, science correspondent Dr. Nikki Ackermans, social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterding, our mods: Beatmaster, W. Scottus1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, aka Gadget Virtuoso, and JD Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music and art provided by Martin Bell, Dan Luders, Mustafa A, Acast, and Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Contributors for this week's shows include Scott Johnson and Justin Robert Young, and our guests this week were Charlotte Henry and Chris Mancini. And thanks to all the patrons who make the show possible.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.